Hello everyone, today we're going to be going over part 1A of the June 2022 Living Environment Regents exam. As of the upload date of this video, the Regents is tomorrow, so this is kind of like a last second review and study video for that test. We're going to be starting with question number 1, which asks, when the carrying capacity for a species in a habitat is reached, the population of the species levels off. This slowing of the rate of growth is most likely due to which of the following, right? So limiting factors, so carrying capacity is pretty much the maximum capacity that an environment has for a specific amount of species or group of species, right? So carrying capacity is mainly based on two things. Number one, it's size of the environment. At a specific point in time, there's simply not enough space for a new species to grow and to flourish. For example, if we were talking about lions, they're in an environment, there's so much space that they can actually build their dens. At some point, they will run out of space to make dens, to make homes, right? And because they can't make homes, they don't have a habitat. That's one thing that's limiting them from breeding out of control. It's the fact that there's no more size left for them. They don't have a habitat, they die off, right? Second is food, right? Food is one of the biggest second biggest limiting factors when it comes to carrying capacity. At some point, there's just so many of the same animal living there that they over consume, over predate, or just overuse the food sources there, right? And then because they overuse the food source, there's mass famine, and the rest of the species pretty much starts to die off, right? So it's size and food capacity, right? And also you could have water too. What? Water. At some point, there's just not enough water for everyone to share, right? But pretty much what I'm talking about here is limiting resources, right? Size, food, and water are all resources, right, that species need. And when the population grows to a certain point, when it grows too big, there's simply not enough resources to permit the growing, right? Or to permit this growth, right? So the growth begins to slow because there's simply not enough resources to sustain that previous growth rate, right? They run out of food, they run out of space, right? So number 2 says, on a hot day, dogs sweat through their paw pads and pant, which helps keep them cool. Both the sweating and panting are what, right? Is it due to due to a loss of oxygen? Well, no, right? Because on a hot day, dogs sweat through their paws and pant, which helps keep them cool. This is about temperature regulation, right? Not because of oxygen, right? And whenever I saw helps keep them cool, I knew immediately it's a response to stimuli, right? Why? Because the hot weather is a stimulus, right? And the response is them sweating, right? They're trying to maintain a dynamic equilibrium or homeostasis, and by panting, by sweating, they are responding to a hot stimulus, right? Due to a lack of adaptation to the environment, no, that's wrong, right? Because if anything, being able to sweat through your paw pads and panting is an adaptation to a hot environment, right? And the failure of cell communication is wrong because you need your cells to communicate in order to facilitate sweating and panting. Also, that's just not true. Moving on to number 3, it asks the formation of, or it says the formation of any kinds of body cells that make up an embryo begin with what? All right, so is it 1? So formation of the many kinds of body cells that make up an embryo start with what, right? So by body cells, we mean pretty much like the beginning of the formation of organs, right? And differentiation, right? And that answer to that is number 3, right? Specific genes being activated. Whenever you see the formation of body cells or the formation of cells, right? The making of cells, that all is genetics, right? Why? Because your genes are the blueprints for new cells, right? So when you begin to form new cells, they consult the blueprints, which is your DNA, found in your chromosomes, right? So in order for you to have specific body features, you need to have the genes for them, right? And the way that in an embryo, this begins, this development of embryonic development, it begins with certain genes being unwinded, right? Which means that they can now be read, and once they're read, they prompt the creation of proteins, new brand new cells, body cells, right? Metabolism has nothing to do with this, and chemical changes also have nothing to do with this. Whenever you see formation of body cells, formation of cells, creation of new cells, always think of genes and the activation of it, right? Number 4 asks, some salmon have been genetically modified to grow bigger at a faster rate than wild salmon. They're kept in fish farming facilities that are not released into the wild. Which statement regarding genetically modified salmon is most likely true, right? So number 1, wild salmon produce sexually, while genetically modified salmon reproduce asexually. This is wrong, right? Because they're genetically modified only to grow bigger and at a faster rate than wild salmon. They're not genetically modified to be asexual. As we all know, salmon, living beings, they have breeding cycles, they lay eggs, they have sperm. So that's all that means. That's all that what that means. Number 2 says wild salmon have an altered protein sequence, but genetically modified salmon don't. Well, this is the opposite way around, right? Because wild salmon, what genetically modifying someone does means that you're altering their genes, right? Which in turn alters their proteins because you're altering the instructions that makes proteins, right? Wild salmon are the least likely to have an altered protein, right? It's more genetically modified salmon that have altered proteins, because when you genetically modify something, you alter it either in its genes or its protein production, right? That leaves us with number 3. Our right answer, genetically modified salmon and wild salmon would have different DNA sequences. I just said that, right? Whenever you genetically modify something, you're changing its DNA sequence, right? So if there's a change in the DNA sequence, obviously it's going to be different than the unchanged DNA sequence, right? So let's say that we add like this specific extra gene to farm salmon, right? Wild salmon don't have that extra gene that makes them bigger, right? So they're going to be different. Genetically modified salmon and wild salmon will have identical DNA samples. Let me just look at the name. Genetically modified salmon and wild salmon. One is being modified, the other is being left alone, so obviously there's going to be a difference. Moving on to number 5, it says a farmer stopped maintaining a field that was once used to grow crops. Over time, the field eventually became a forest. These changes best illustrate the process of number 1, ecological succession. Right, this is pretty much where you have like a barren field, and then out of nowhere like some rocks form, and then some shrubs form, and then some bushes form, some animals move in, and then you have bigger bushes and trees, right? So ecological succession is that process by which you convert pretty much an empty place or a lifeless place into one that really flourishes, right? Competition has nothing to do, right? Because you need animals for that, right? Decomposition has nothing to do, because how can you grow a tree from just eating a dead body? And nutrient recycling also has nothing to do with this, because this is the introduction of brand new species, aka tree species, into a brand new environment. So that's ecological succession. Number 6 says during a woman's menstrual cycle, ovulation occurs when the egg is released. This process is important because it allows for what? Number 1, the eggs to be produced by mitosis and fertilized by sperm. That's wrong. Eggs and other sex cells like sperms are produced by meiosis, not mitosis. Sperm to fertilize the egg in the uterus. This is wrong, right? Because the sperm does not fertilize the egg in the uterus. It happens in the fallopian tubes, and then the fertilized egg then descends, right? Multiple sperms to fertilize one egg, which then forms the placenta. That's also wrong, right? Because it's only one sperm that fertilizes one egg, right? Leaves number 4, right? The egg to leave the ovary and then be fertilized by a sperm, right? That's all. That's what it does. That's pretty much why ovulation occurs, right? The eggs are usually stored in these ends, right? And then they travel down the fallopian tube. The sperm travels up. They meet right here, right? But in order for it to first happen there, you need to ovulate. You need to release that egg into that area, right? Number 7 says the primary function of estrogen and progesterone is to what? Is it to regulate growth? Nope. Is it control heartbeat? Nope. Is it monitor blood sugar levels? Nope. It is to regulate reproductive cycles. Whenever you see progesterone, think pregnancy. This is definitely pregnancy, and estrogen is definitely which is part of reproducing, and estrogen is just the female sex hormone, right? Sex hormone, which is heavily released during the menstrual cycle, and they're all regulating the reproductive cycle. That's all. So estrogen, progesterone, female reproductive cycle. That's all. Number 8 asks which characteristic is most common to types of cancers. Number 3, rapid uncontrolled cell division. All a cancer is just a cell that it has is dividing uncontrollably due to either a mutation or some defect in it. Number 9 says that the human body fights an infection when a pathogen is detected. As a result, the pathogen stimulates the production of 2 antibodies. This is a review of your immune system. You should know that, right? Whenever you have a pathogen, you're going to form antibodies, which are usually these Y-shaped things that come and bind to the surface of the pathogen to help deal with it, right? When a pathogen does not stimulate antibiotics, right? Antibiotics are artificial. Your body doesn't produce antibiotics, nor does your body produce vaccines. And if your body produced bacteria whenever there was an infection, that would kind of be the opposite of what you need. You need antibodies that fight the infection. Moving on to number 10, the levels of organization in humans are represented below. Cell level X most likely represents which of the following, right? So here, so this is how we're organized, or our innards are organized, right? It goes cells. You should all know that after cells it goes tissues, right? From tissue form organs form organ systems, and organ systems form organisms, right? It goes from cells to tissues, right? All of these are wrong, right? Organelles and ribosomes are wrong because that's what form a cell, so that would be before that. And molecules is what forms organelles and ribosomes, right? So organelles would go before cells. Ribosomes are the same thing as an organelle, so it would be in the same category, and molecules make up everything, right? So tissues is the answer. Number 11, biological process is represented below. The reason hormones affect the target cell and not other cell is that number 1, hormones provide energy to only the target cell. Nope. The answer is number 2. A target cell has specific receptors for that hormone. Remember, enzymes, enzyme receptors, right? They on each cell, they always have a specific receptor for a specific hormone, right? So let's just say this is hormone A, and this is cell C. Hormone A is only supposed to go to cell C because it only fits in that specific receptor, right? Here we have hormone B. Hormone B is a square. It won't fit in the circle in the little cuff hole, right? It always needs to fit. In order for hormones to target specific cells, they need to have the specific receptors for that cell. That's why. Number 12 says the diagram below represents one of a number of different types of mutations that can occur in DNA. The mutation can best be described as the what? So let's just say what happens here. We have CAC. Here we have CAC. So far, so good. Then we have TAG. TAG. Here, instead, it's TAA. Right, and now we have CAG right here, right? So what happened here was a substitution of adenine for the base guanine. This is the original sequence. We had TAG, right? And this is the mutation, right? It goes TAA. So this guanine was substituted for adenine, right? It was replaced. It was substituted, right? If it was obviously the rest of these are pretty simple to cross out. It obviously wasn't deleted because it's still the same number of bases on both sides. It wasn't an insertion because once again there's the same number of bases on both sides, and it wasn't a pairing because this doesn't show pairing. It's only one single strand, right? 13 says that after digesting nutrients from a high meal in carbohydrates, the body does what? It releases insulin to return blood sugar to normal levels, right? Carbohydrates are sugars. When you eat high sugar foods, your blood sugar level spikes all the way up, right? And that triggers the feedback mechanism. You should have learned this in class. When your blood sugar level is too high or too low, that's really bad. So your body naturally regulates it. When your blood sugar level is way high, your body's supposed to secrete insulin to to lower it down to a manageable level, right? So every single time you eat a meal high in sugar, you need insulin. Always remember that insulin regulates blood sugar level, right? That's all, right? All of these other things are false because it's only insulin that returns blood sugar levels to normal. Number 14 says the diagram below represents a pair of guard cells changing shape, reducing the size of the stomatal leaf opening. Right, so here are the guard cells, and then after they they pretty much tighten, and then the stomal opening is a lot smaller. Right, so it's asking that this is an adaptation that benefits plants by regulating the flow of water vapor out of leaves. Right. So what you really need for photosynthesis, of course, is water. You also need CO2, and you need sunlight. Right? A lot of times plants store water in their stems, or just in their stems, right? And you also need CO2. So the plants need to intake CO2, but when they intake CO2, water vapor often in arid and dry environments, water vapor often evaporates when they're trying to intake CO2. At the same time, even if they're not trying to intake CO2, water vapor is always trying to leave the plant through any openings that it can find. The stomal opening is one such opening, right? So in very hot environments where there's not a lot of water available to the plants, they develop this type of mechanism to close any holes, to close any openings, so that the water inside doesn't come out and doesn't evaporate, right? Because the more water they have, the more effectively that they can photosynthesize their own sugars and survive and eat, right? It doesn't prevent the flow of carbon dioxide, right? And if CO2 was in there, that probably benefit respiration, right? Increasing the flow of oxygen molecules into leaf, that has nothing to do with this. Is based on water. And increasing the flow of liquid water into leaves, that has nothing to do. This is just trying to keep it from coming out. Always remember that. Number 15 says that experiments in mice show that a guardian gene that protects against type 1 diabetes can be altered by exposure to antibiotics during the development. The exposure alters the gut bacteria, leading to a loss of the guardian's gene's production. The loss of this production most likely interferes with, I think this answer to this is 1, homeostasis, right? It protects against type 1 diabetes, right? Diabetes, of course, it's a issue with insulin production. As we were talking about in this problem right here, there, number 13, you need insulin to regulate your blood sugar levels. That is a part of homeostasis, right? Because you're trying to maintain a balance. After you eat a meal, this goes all the way up. Your blood sugar level goes all the way up, so your body tries to maintain homeostasis by lowering it down and keeping it stable. So you kind of have this. That's homeostasis in action. Because type 1 diabetics and just most type of diabetes have issues with insulin production, or issue with just insulin application in general, it's mainly interfering with homeostasis, because they can't release that molecule that regulates these levels. It's permanently going to stay up, or it's going to crash down. It's not going to be flat and where it should be. Moving on to number 16, it says a food web is represented below. Which organism is correctly paired with its role in the ecosystem, right? So quick review of how this works. Wherever the arrow goes is whoever eats it, right? So if the arrow points to the mice, that means the mice eat the grass, right? Grass goes to the grasshoppers, that means that the grasshoppers eat the grass, right? So number 1 says that the grass is both a consumer and a decomposer. That's false, right? The grass is the only thing that is not eating anything, right? We know that because there's no arrow going to the grass, because the grass isn't eating anything, and because obviously it's grass, this is our producer. It's at the start of our web. That's also another marker that it's our producer. But mainly, you should know that grass is a plant. Plants are producers, right? So it's not a consumer or a decomposer. The toads function as composers and autotrophs. That's wrong, right? Because what is an autotroph? An autotroph is a producer. The grass is the only autotroph here. Toads consume, right? They don't make their own food. 3, the grasshopper focuses as a consumer and a heterotroph. Let's just see this. Yeah, that's right? because it functions as a consumer, right? It consumes the grass, and it functions it is a heterotroph. What a heterotroph means is that it uses other people for food. It consumes for food, right? So that matches it perfectly. Snakes aren't herbivores because snakes eat mice and toads, which are living animals, right? And not plants. 17 says many adults lack the ability to digest milk, sugar. The milk, sugar, lactose. Often, this is due to the insufficient production of an enzyme which breaks down lactose, aka this is what lactose intolerant people have to deal with. This is not due to an allergy in milk. Milk allergies are different because they are what? Well, it's four. They result in an overreaction in the immune system to a harmless substance, right? Right here, what's happening with lactose intolerant people is that they simply lack the production of an enzyme, right? Lactase, which breaks it down, right? An allergy is an immune response, right? It's always going to be an immune response. Here, immune responses don't deal with having to actually break it down. They deal with killing the pathogen, right? They start attacking the milk pathogen rather than simply digesting it in your stomach, right? Number one, allergies to milk allergies are different because they are harmful to a person, right? They don't result in the buildup of the substance in the body, right? If anything, an allergy to milk means that your body's trying to get it out of you as quickly as possible, and the digestive system doesn't attack the substance of milk. That is the immune system, right? I just went over that. So yeah, it's an immune response, right? An allergy is an immune response. It's an overreaction of your immune system, right? One reason energy must be consistently added to a stable ecosystem is because energy is what? Well, energy is because energy is lost at every feeding level, right? If we look at a food or the energy levels in an ecosystem, right? You notice that it takes this pyramid shape. That's because the bottom level has the most energy and the top level has the least energy, right? Why is that? It's because with each time you go up, so energy is lost to the surrounding environment, right? It's approximately 10% of all energy in the ecosystem is lost to the environment, right? So less and less energy is passed on to the next and passed on to the next, right? So the reason why you constantly need more energy, why you constantly need more plants is to account for this loss of energy, right? If you want to grow your ecosystem, you need more energy to grow it, right? Which means you need a wider base so that this level has more energy, right? So think about it. Which one will have more energy? Obviously this has more energy because just look at the space of the top, right? But in order to have this big of an energy pyramid, you first need to add energy to the bottom, right? Pretty much what I'm trying to get at here is because all you need to know is that energy is 10% of all the ecosystem's energy is lost at each level, right? And you constantly need new energy flowing in to account for that loss, or else everyone will lose energy and that'll be done, right? Number 3 is really wrong because you can't destroy energy, you can't make energy either, and it's not incorporated into fossil fuels, it's lost in the environment, and it's not digested by herbivores, it's lost in the environment. Number 19 states that we're asked which statement best illustrates the direct competition within a species, right? So it's within a species, so it's the same species. A chipmunk is caught and eaten by a hungry fox. That's not competition at all, right? That's just a fox eating a chipmunk. 2, a deer attempts to escape a mountain lion that is chasing it. That's not competition, that's simply predation. Number 3 says 2 muskrats mate and produce a litter of offspring. That's not competition at all, that's reproduction. Number 4 says several squirrels eat acorns from the same oak tree where they live. Those several squirrels, they're not part of the same family. They're their own individuals, and they're all living in the same tree and competing over those same acorns. Number 20 says after a kidney transplant, special medications are often taken. Otherwise, the patient's immune system might react to the transplanted kidney by number 1, producing specialized proteins that would otherwise attack the kidney. This is called organ rejection. Pretty much, as I said in previous videos, whenever you have an organ transplant, there's always a risk of your body rejecting the organ. It thinks that the organ is a foreign pathogen, that it's a disease, because it doesn't belong there, and your immune system begins attacking and trying to destroy the brand new organ, right? All of these are wrong, simply because because they're not immune system responses, right? reproductive hormones have nothing to do with the immune system. Circulatory system to attack red blood cells has nothing. Circulatory system doesn't attack anything, right? And signaling the body to synthesize new DNA molecules also has nothing to do with the immune system fighting off a foreign pathogen. That's all. Right? So 21 says that information that scientists are able to obtain from fossil records includes what? Right? Does it include confirmation that Earth is 4.5 million years old? No, it doesn't. Number one, Earth is 4.5 billion years old, much older, and fossils can't determine that because the Earth was formed way longer, way before the first animals were here, right? 2, data supporting that hypotheses that an animal species do not change over time. That's wrong, right? Because they do. They are able to, information that scientists are able to obtain from fossil records include data supporting the hypothesis that animal species do not change over time. There are factors other than bone, right? There's also DNA factors. There's the chance that the population split because of a natural disaster or a natural barrier that emerged between them. Number 3 says the exact means by which life on Earth began. That's also wrong. A bone can't tell you how that animal was born or what that animal was born for. And 4 says, which is the right answer, says evidence about past environments and a history of life. That is true, right? From bones, you can determine that, oh, I guess it was an aquatic creature, and this environment was wet, right? Because it has fin bones or tail bones. Or you could say that, oh, well, these bones are very very thick and they're splayed almost like a foot, which means that this animal lived on a dry land environment, right? In the history of life part, different species, you can carbon date fossils, and you can kind of paint a picture through carbon dating. You know when the fossils are from, and you can kind of paint a picture of what species were alive at what point in the history of the Earth, right? Number 22 says fire ants have a powerful venom that is deadly to small animals they eat. The deadly venom has reduced the populations of birds who build nests on the ground. So the relationship between fire ants and ground nesting birds is an example of what, right? Obviously, it's not a producer or consumer because neither birds nor ants are plants, right? Nor do they make their own food, right? They're not. It's not a scavenger versus decomposer, right? Because they eat small animals, right? They kill and eat small animals. Right? They don't scavenge. They directly inject venom into them, right? A scavenger would be true if these ants just found a dead body and began eating it. They actively hunt using that deadly venom, right? And they don't decompose anything either. Is it a parasite or host? Absolutely not, because you don't see these ants like latching onto the birds and feeding off the birds, right? It's most likely a predator and prey relationship, right? Deadly venom has reduced populations of birds who build nests on the ground, right? That obviously what's happening here is that the ants are trying to attack the population of birds who build their nest close to the ant nests, right? Why? Well, for food, right? So it's predator and prey. The ants are predating on small bird animals, right? If it was a parasite and host, then the ants would have to live on the birds, and they would have to like mooch off their resources, but instead they're simply just killing them straight off the bat, right? So moving on to number 23, it asks, when an altered ecosystem is left undisturbed, the most likely result would be what? Gradual evolution of the original species. That's wrong, right? Because evolution occurs when there's a change in an environment or like radiation, right? If an environment stays the same, there's no need for evolution because nothing is changing, right? Usually when species evolve, it's to better adapt to a changing environment, but since there's no change, you don't need that, right? Number 2 says a rapid return to the original ecosystem. I don't see how that's possible, right? Because you would need to alter the ecosystem in order for it to return to the original ecosystem, right? And if it's already altered, there's really no way you could return that, right? It'll probably stay the same altered ecosystem, right? The elimination of all predator species, that's wrong, right? Because you would have to directly interfere in order to eliminate all the predator species. You would have to like hunt them, or you'd have to release chemicals into the ground, or you'd have to do something. Remember, we're leaving this ecosystem alone, which meaning that we're not harming any animals. So the populations would probably stay stable, which leads me into number 4, which is the right answer: a gradual shift toward a stable ecosystem. Right? The more that humans leave an environment alone, usually the more stable the more stable it gets, right? If we're not altering the ecosystem in any way, shape, or form, it's going to lead to population growth. It's probably going to lead to more species and more bigger population of species. Not an introduction of new species, but just larger populations of existing species. And because there are more people, there's more diversity, and that means that it's more stable, right? So an altered ecosystem, once you leave it alone, it slowly begins to heal and begins to become more stable, right? 24 says dead zones are areas found in oceans and some large lakes where there is not enough oxygen to support life. Algae blooms occur when excess nutrients are introduced as pollutants from fertilizers, sewage treatment plants, and the burning of fossil fuels. When the algae die and undergo decay, bacteria rapidly use up the oxygen in the area. Which human activity would most result in a decrease in the size and the number? Sorry about that. As I was saying, the which human activity would most likely result in a decrease in the size and number of dead zones, right? So it just said that the introduction of pollutants from fertilizers and sewage plants and the burning of fossil fuels cause it, right? So if we want to stop that from happening, obviously we're going to have to reduce the use of chemicals on farms and golf courses. Why? Because it says that the main cause of this is pollutants from fertilizers, right? Farm fields use fertilizers, golf courses use fertilizer, right? Sewage treatment plants, that's once again farms need to use sewage treatment in order to get new water. Same thing with golf courses, right? The construction of more sewage treatment plants would mean that there's more pollution going into lakes, and we just know that sewage treatment plants cause this. Building more coal-fired electrical generating plants, that's burning more fossil fuels, which causes it. And irrigating fields and lawns to increase runoff into oceans and rivers, that is pollutants from fertilizers. That's how you get that, right? So 25 says a recent study from high levels of the toxic industrial pollutant from mercury. A recent study found, high levels of the toxic industrial pollutant mercury in the feathers of some songbirds. Those birds sang shorter, simpler versions of the songs they used to attract mates. Which statement regarding this finding is supported by this study? Right? Number 1, mercury pollution resulted in the extinction of all songbirds. That does not support this, right? Because none of them are actually dying. They're just singing simpler songs to mate, right? Number 2 says mercury prevents songbirds from attaining required nutrients. That has nothing to do. It never told me that they were getting less food. They're simply just singing more simple songs, right? 3 says human activities usually affect the smallest animals in the ecosystem. That has nothing to do with this, right? It doesn't even tell us the size of the songbird. I'm assuming a songbird is a pretty big bird, right? But human activities can affect large animals. Think about poaching, right? We poach populations of elephants, right? And that almost, led them to extinction. Human hunting, which is an activity, often leads to the extinction of big animals like the rhinoceros, right? And number 4 is our only answer, right? Because human activities can have a negative effect on a species, right? We pollute mercury is an industrial pollutant, which means that we built an industry and we polluted the environment with it, and because of that this species is suffering because it's now singing shorter songs, which means that we're affecting their brain chemistry, right? So number 26, it says which row in the chart shows the connection between the processes, structures, and hormones involved in the formation of an embryo, right? So fairly certain answers 2, right? First things first, insulin. We've talked about this like 3 times in this review. This is a feedback mechanism. It's a blood sugar feedback mechanism. That's not differentiation. Differentiation is when you get new organs, right? And insulin is also involved in the pancreas, so we know that's definitely wrong. Number 3, union of gametes. Insulin, that is not the hormone when they form. Insulin is once again in the pancreas, and it's a feedback mechanism, right? So that's wrong. Respirations, yeah, it occurs in the lung, yeah, but the hormone involved isn't estrogen, right? Estrogen is a sex hormone. It's in sex, in the reproductive cycle, right? So because this hormone is wrong, that leaves us with number 2 as the right answer, right? Gamete formation, aka the egg and sperm, right? Here it's saying that it's involved. The structure involved is testes, so I know it's just sperm. And yeah, testosterone triggers sperm growth, right? Testosterone is a sex hormone. It regulates the reproductive cycle. So that's the only correct answer there. Number 27 says a food and web energy pyramid are represented below. A group of organisms from the food web that would be found at level X of the energy pyramid is the what, right? So usually level X is reserved to apex predators. And like tertiary and quaternary level consumers, right? So people at the top of the food chain. So all we have to do to find this is who is at the top of the food chain, right? So obviously it's going to be owls, right? Because trees, right, are at the bottom of the food web, right? Trees are down here. They're the producers, right? Crickets. Trees and grasses, sorry, would be down here. Right, next would be crickets. Right, then crickets, right, are they eaten by something? Yeah, they're eaten by frogs, right? Which means that, and then the frogs are eaten by owls, right? So, and then deer are eaten. Actually, I guess deer don't have any natural predators in this scenario, but that doesn't make them the apex predator, because they're herbivore, and they're primary consumer, and primary consumers belong in the level right after the producers and autotrophs, right? Pretty much because the owl has no natural predators, right? Both the hawk and the owl are apex predators. Apex predators, these two creatures are at the top of the food web, right? Obviously, because they're not eaten by anything. They're at the end of it. Anything at the top of the food pyramid that has no natural predators is probably going to be reserved for this space right there. Number 28 says it may be possible to bring back some extinct species using recent advances in genetic technology. Opinions regarding this issue are split within the scientific community. The table below summarizes some of the arguments on both sides. Right, so one of the sides argues that argues for it, right? It says that it would increase the biodiversity of an ecosystem, and it says it would bring back organisms that are extinct, right? The against it, right, say that organisms are brought back will compete with existing species, and the process is very expensive, right? And we want to see that the arguments made by both sides provide evidence that that the new technology requires decisions on an assessment of cost, benefit, and risk. Yeah, right? Here, this was talking about cost, right? Here, this was talking about benefits, right? It increases biodiversity. And the risk here is that organisms brought back will compete, right? Really just a summary question. 3, any new technology that increases the biodiversity should be used. That doesn't summarize it because obviously we're ignoring the entire con argument, which says that we shouldn't use it. The introduction of genetic technology will benefit organisms equally. That's ignoring the con. That's ignoring the fact that they can compete with existing species. Genetic technology is the best way to correct human damage done to the environment. That's wrong because, once again, it ignores the possible competition and further damage to the environment that it can bring. Number 29 says, which statement best explains the purpose of the microorganisms in this aquarium? So, microorganisms recycle nutrients to support the ecosystem. That is our answer right here. They recycle nutrients to support the ecosystem. How do I know this? Well, what I'm going to assume here is whenever one of these leaves die, whenever this fish dies, whenever the snail dies, the body drops to the sand at the bottom, and then microorganisms such as bacteria is a microorganism, and that usually is a decomposer. Right, microorganisms in environments are usually 99% of the time decomposers, and what decomposers do is they recycle nutrients, right? So whenever any of these things die, they fall to the floor, and then bacteria, or microorganisms found in the sand eat them, and they recycle nutrients, right? You cannot recycle energy in the ecosystem, right? They recycle the nutrients, right? And once the bacteria die out, those nutrients are released back into soil and reabsorbed in for the plant, right? Microorganisms are a source of food for the plant. That's wrong. The source of food is the sunlight. Microorganisms are an abiotic factor. That's wrong. Microorganisms are biotic. Biotic. They're living. 30 says a new species of floating photosynthetic algae was accidentally introduced into a pond ecosystem. It gradually replaced all the original algal species. One possible reason for the replacement is that the new species could be what? Well, what do we just say here, right? It was accidentally introduced, right? So it's non-native, and it replaced all original algal species, right? So it's an invasive species. It's non-native. It got introduced. It spread like crazy, and it ended up harming the environment. And based on this information, we can say that a possible reason for why they replaced it was because they were simply overcompeted for abiotic factors, right? So this new algae, right, was able to grow rapidly, which took up the oxygen and CO2 in the water. It also took up space. It also took up nutrients. It stole all of that from the original algal species, and because they had less energy, because they had less oxygen, less space, less CO2, less nutrients, right? They simply could not afford to reproduce and pass on their genes. So, in other words, they got outcompeted for abiotic factors, right? So that's questions 1 through 30. That's part A. This is probably one of the trickier parts of the living environment test. For all those who are taking it tomorrow, I wish you the best of luck. If you like this video, please consider leaving a like and subscribe. That being said, have a nice day and good luck.